High in the Alps, the trees are under great environmental stress. In fact, these are at the tree line, which means they can't live any higher. Looks idyllic, but today in these penthouse forests, all is not well.
No, I'm not dying of high altitude sickness, but lying flat on my back doing the acid test of tree health. Just look up into the canopy.
Acid rain is in the air. But of course, acid rain is as natural as the day is long, part of one of those great cycles which makes this living world go round. Naples, a city built at the foot of Vesuvius, one of the world's most famous sleeping volcanoes. The city is built on, in and around the remains of 40 other volcanoes, each one of which in the past blew their tops and collapsed to form calderas, great cauldrons within which we can still savour the elements of creation. I'm standing in the middle of a natural chemical laboratory, and at this point, not all that far below my feet, there's molten rock called magma. Now, if you can imagine actually rocks being in solution, that's exactly what's way down there, a solution of all the chemical elements that makes up not only this Earth, but the whole of the universe. Now, thanks to the giant fissure behind me, which must go way down, it's called the Bocco Grande, and some of those elements are coming up to the surface. Now, I suppose the best thing is to call it earth exhaust, the exhaust gases of volcanic activity, mixed up with lots and lots of water, steam. There's all mainly carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen. In fact, all the elements that you and I are made of. And that's just for starters. And all around me, other minerals are crystallising onto the rocks, including some rather rare and nasty ones like mercury and arsenic. Pretty, aren't they? But the predominant colour hereabouts is yellow, and that's due to elemental sulphur. And I tell you, when this lot last went up to form this giant caldera, it must have sprayed a vast area of Italy and beyond with a yellow powder. So, even though we think of volcanoes as being destructive things, they also act as giant sulphur shakers, putting this all-important element into the cycles of life. The essence of life is protein, and the proteins which we are made of contain tiny amounts of sulphur. Yes, even our hair is made of a protein called keratin. If it wasn't for the sulphur in my hair, it wouldn't curl or stand upright. In fact, it'd fall flat on my face. Fantastico.
Bene, grazie.
Mille grazie. And mille grazie to sulphur too. Now, if you don't believe that there's sulphur in there, think when you singe your hair, that acrid smell, that is partly due to sulphur. And if it wasn't for the sulphur in the synovial membranes in my joints, I'd seize up. I wouldn't be able to talk with my hand. I wouldn't be able to be David Bellamy. And if it wasn't for the sulphur bond in the proteins that make up my muscles and my enzymes, those bonds hold the proteins into special shape so as they can work properly, I'd begin to fall to pieces. I'd be in a really poorly state. So I, like all other living things, need a constant supply of sulphur. Not too little, not too much. I get mine from the food I eat, especially those hot-tasting things like garlic and onions, with biting, acrid flavours.
Questo va bene?
Sì, questo forse va bene, ecco. Sì. Quello è ancora più bello.
Ever since Roman times, people have been coming to Naples not just for a haircut or to enjoy the flavourful food, but to bask in the subtropical warmth of the caldera and to take its sulphurous waters. Today there is a modern institute of hydrotherapy within which the goodness of those sulphurous waters is administered in a variety of ways. You can be suffused by it, inhale it, breathe it, or even snort it through a plastic pipe. One treatment I just had to try was a bath in volcanic mud, which used alongside hydrotherapy with the mineral-rich volcanic waters brings relief from those suffering from things like rheumatism and arthritis. So, while I'm being done good, I thought I'd take the opportunity of following the natural pathways of that element called sulphur. So I asked them to wheel me into the Roman steam baths.
Wonderful, the most soothing thing that's ever happened to me. And it's great too for all the mega billions of bacteria that are living in my mud envelope. And some of them have the wonderful name of Sulfolobus acidocaldarius, the sulphur gobbling bacteria that live in the acid muds of the caldera. Now, 80 degrees is a bit too warm for me, but it's absolutely perfect for the bacteria because they're now all changing the elemental sulphur into sulphur dioxide, which being a gas rises up into the atmosphere, makes acid rain and of course puts sulphur far and wide all over the landscape, far from these centres of volcanic activity. And yes, we're coming up to reaction temperature. It's beginning to work. Sulphur, part of the breath of life itself.
So, volcanoes and volcanic activity do a very important job, injecting sulphur into the atmosphere and so into the cycles of life. However, volcanoes are few and far between, and so, thank goodness, are eruptions. Sulphur dioxide is very soluble, so once released, it'll soon get washed down towards the sea. En route, there are a number of sulphur recycling stations, and none more important than the estuaries, which are strategically dotted around the world. 40,000 feathers on a thrush, all of which need sulphur, so you can guess how many there are paddling about in this sulphur service station. Mud flats in the colder climes and mangrove swamps in the tropics all perform the same job. They provide a habitat in which life is governed by the rhythm of the tides and the lack of oxygen down in the mud. So even the tree roots have breathing pores. Some even grow upside down. The crabs, which feed on the rich pickings in the mud, can survive for long periods down below. But every now and again, they have to pop up for a breath of fresh air.
And who can blame them? Because the smell down here is absolutely revolting. Rotten eggs. You see, muds the world over are the dank, dark homes of whole armies of bacteria who all live it up on the products of decay. And I tell you, down here in this mud, there's no oxygen at all. And so the bacteria produce hydrogen sulfide, another gas which puts that all-important element sulphur back into the cycles of life.
So estuarine ecosystems are key parts of the sulphur cycle, releasing it back into the atmosphere as a gas. Some then gets blown back onto the land, and some ends up in the sea, where it helps the marine plankton to grow.
This culture flask contains one of the most important plants in the world, at least when it comes to sulphur and acid rain. Its name is Emiliana huxleyi, and there's millions and millions of them, tiny floating plants. And like all living things in the sea, they've got a problem because they have to keep the inside of their living cells in balance with the salt out in the open ocean, because if too much salt gets in, they're in all sorts of problems. And to do this, Emiliana huxleyi stores away inside a very complex substance called dimethyl sulfonopropionate. It's almost twice as long as its Latin name. And it's a sort of an antifreeze, well, not an antifreeze, but an anti-salt. And while it's got enough of that inside, the whole living cell is in balance. And when it begins to die, the sulphur in that breaks down to form dimethyl sulfide, which is a gas, and bubbles up into the atmosphere. And that's where most of the world's acid rain comes from.
What is more, sulphur helps to trigger the formation of water droplets, acid droplets in the clouds, which fall as acid rain. Yes, rain has always been slightly acid, carrying sulphur around the world and en route helping to dissolve rock particles, releasing other minerals into solution. So the sulphur cycle goes round and round and even brings that precious element up onto the high hills where it makes my favourite bog plants grow. Now, as I'm standing on a bog on a deep layer of peat, I can prove the presence of sulphur. You see, just like in the mangrove swamp, deep down in the peat, or not all that far down, is an anaerobic layer where there's no oxygen at all. And down there are bacteria, and they are producing smelly hydrogen sulfide gas. And last night, I put this on my marker down a bit of the family silver. And up it comes, and the bottom there is tarnished with silver sulfide. But of course, there's other presence of the sulphur hereabout, and that's running about on 4 legs. S is for Scotland, sheep, spinning, and sulphur. The sulphur puts a stiffening in the protein molecules, bonding them together so that after spinning and weaving, they can take up their original function, and that's protection from the weather. So thanks to the magic of the sulphur cycle and the rain, which is always naturally slightly acid, our alpine plants almost at the top of our mountains can grow well, like this diminutive mountain horsetail. And there it is with the joints in its stems and the ribs running down the length. And in there is the sulphur it's taken up during its lifetime. Unfortunately, the same is true of its gigantic ancestors. This is a fossil horsetail, almost 280 million years old, and there are the joints, so they're closer together, and there are the milled striations. And in there's the sulphur it took up in its lifetime. Coal is made of plant material, and so it contains sulphur, some more than others. And And when it's burned, that sulfur is released as sulfur dioxide, SO2, which dissolves in water and turns the rain superacid. With the industrialised world burning more and more coal every year, and with other sources of acid from petrol, oil and chemical processes, it's little wonder that things are going wrong in an increasingly dramatic way. Trees and whole forests have been and are being killed over very large areas. Hundreds of kilometres downwind from any major industrial input, lakes have lost all their fish. Because you see, as lake waters get more acid, poisonous minerals like aluminium, zinc and lead flood out into solution. The sulfur cycle is in disarray, and worldwide, parts of the earth are being destroyed by too much acid. Remember, any piece of landscape is like a gigantic chemistry set. And the only capacity any landscape has got for buffering, for neutralising incoming acidity, is actually certain minerals down in the soil. Now, they're only replaced by the gradual breakdown of the bedrock. And of course, that's a very, very slow process. So any soil we look at has got a certain acid buffering capacity. And anything which happens on the catchment, bringing more acidity through the soil so that it can't be neutralised, then it's going to pass on, get into the lake and could kill off the fish. So the problem is, can these lakes ever be put back into working order? In an attempt to find out, Loch Fleet on the west coast of Scotland was chosen for study. All its fish had died of too much acid back in 1970. So in 1984, the whole catchment was put to the test. Weirs counted the fish up and down, and water was sampled and analysed for acidity and other key chemical constituents. Then, in 1986, powdered limestone was added to the catchment to neutralise the acid. Limestone is calcium carbonate, which slowly breaks down and neutralises the acidity in the rain, the soil and, one hopes, in the lakes. A massive job in this rough terrain, but on it went at 10 tonnes to the hectare. The liming worked, and with a bit of help, the fish came back to stay. There's only two problems. It costs an awful lot of money and it produces a lot of carbon dioxide. A typical mountain stream which hasn't had any lime added to it, bubbling its way down to one of those acid lakes. Now the lady trout swim up and they lay thousands of eggs, but they just don't hatch. Well, they may hatch and a tail pop out of one end and a head at the other, but the baby fish die. And they certainly couldn't survive their 2 years out in these acid waters to return to restock the lake. But just behind me, in a couple of simple wooden sheds, is proof positive that when it comes to fish survival, adding lime to the water holds the key. Fish eggs are hatched in tanks supplied with stream water, which is treated with lime to reduce the acidity, and all is well. The fry are then reared on until ready for life in the rehabilitated locks roundabout. So, more acid-tolerant fish are now available for export to help solve the problems in other places. Super acid rain knows no boundaries and it affects all walks of life. It's even eroding some of the world's most famous buildings, turning their facades into nothing more than rock crumble. Unlike the tourists who can at least put up their umbrellas, the buildings have no protection from acid rain.
I can even show you how it works. One block of Istrian marble, the sort of thing many of these beautiful buildings are actually faced with. Now, marble is mainly made of calcium carbonate. And here I've got a bottle of very acid rain. In fact, sulfuric acid itself. Watch out. On it goes, and immediately the whole thing begins to fizz away. And those are bubbles of carbon dioxide going up into the atmosphere. And look, the rock surface is crumbling. It's turning into gypsum, calcium sulfate. And that's soluble in water, so next time the rain comes down, it just washes the surface of the building away.
And how about us? A little bit of sulphur does you good, but too much, and we've all got problems, him and me. Now, the corrosion on that sour face is all due to the super acidity in the atmosphere. And remember, we're breathing it all the time ourselves. When I was a boy, smogs were a grimy fact of London life. Why, in one weekend in 1952, 4,000 people died of its effects. Smog masks were only trying to cure the complaint once it had been created. Smog from sulphurous coal burnt in our homes. Smog from factories. Smog from puffer trains. It was so bad that public outcry led to the Clean Air Act of 1956. Environmentalism was on the way. Back almost where we started, in the caldera in the middle of Naples, where there's always sulfur dioxide in excess. And just look at the trees. Aren't they doing well? The reason is that they're all rooted in good volcanic soil full of lime. Nature again and again shows us that we must get the balance right, and at long last we're beginning to follow her example. Across the thinking world, giant power stations are being retrofitted with sulphur scrubbers to clear the atmosphere, like this one in Holland. Now, remember what I did back in Venice? I added acid to limestone and made it fizz, producing carbon dioxide dissolving the limestone. Well, behind me in this giant tower, that's exactly what's happening, but in reverse. You see, all those flue gases containing that potential super acid rain are moving up the tower, and they meet wet limestone dust, which is being sprayed down from the top. And the two react together, neutralising the acidity. It costs an awful lot of money, but it's well worth the effort. And the end product, gypsum, and all that noxious sulphurs locked up in there as calcium sulfate, out of harm's way. And it doesn't go to waste either, because it's the raw material for the gypsum industry, which produces things like wall plaster, plaster of Paris, and plasterboard with that fantastic insulating properties. And all from what was a waste product and went up into the sky, producing the problems of super acid rain. One major problem remains. Neutralising the acidity produces more carbon dioxide, and up it goes into the Earth's greenhouse. So we must all do our bit to help combat the problem. Who's going to fill it in? Come on. On this side first, I think, yeah. Planting trees, the right ones in the right places, can help, for they do soak up carbon dioxide, at least while they're growing. Right, now, who's got the big boots to tread it in? Carefully, don't tread on the tree. There. How's that? Do you think that'll go? Right, next one. Where's the next hole? Over there, come on. Great fun and very helpful in many ways. But the only real way of solving these problems is by burning less fuel. Most of the houses where we live now are environmental catastrophes, spewing out rather than keeping energy in. So, how about a bit of real home improvement, making our homes and our lives more energy efficient? And you can find all the stuff you need down at the local DIY. There you are, one state-of-the-art, do-it-yourself home energy saving kit. Now, my house was 3.5 on the home energy rating scale, and I've installed this lot. How will I do?
Well, David, you'll score a 5 on the National Home Energy Rating Scale.
What, only 5? All that expense, all that effort? How long is it going to take me to get my money back?
Well, installing this lot should pay back within 2 years.
Only 2 years?
Yep.
So I must be saving quite a lot of energy. How much?
You certainly are. You're saving 20% of your total energy.
No, that's not bad at all. 20% of my fuel bills, 20% of the energy coming into my house, and of course it could be I'm saving as much as 20% of the sulfur going up into the atmosphere. And of course I've also got my own hidden secret weapon, my thermals and long johns, real personal energy saving. Think about it. For every litre of petrol or fuel oil and every megawatt of coal we save, well, we tackle the problems of the greenhouse effect and superacid rain before they've even started. Of course, we can't all benefit from a bijou residence like that warmed by the exhaust gases from a volcano, but we can make our lifestyles more sulphur-friendly.
And Bellamy rides again for the last programme in the series next Thursday at 8, when he examines how humans are in danger of upsetting the world's delicately balanced life support system.
If it wasn't for the sulfur bonds in the proteins that make up my muscles and my enzymes, those bonds hold the proteins into special shape so they can work properly, I'd begin to fall to pieces. I'd be in a really poorly state. So I, like all other living things, need a constant supply of sulfur. Not too little, not too much. I get mine from the food I eat, especially those hot-tasting things like garlic and onions with biting, acrid flavours.
Questo va bene?
Qua? Sì, questo forse va bene, ecco. Sì. Quello è ancora più bello.
Ever since Roman times, people have been coming to Naples not just for a haircut or to enjoy the flavourful food, but to bask in the subtropical warmth of the Caldera and to take its sulphurous waters. Today, there is a modern institute of Italy and beyond with a yellow powder. So, even though we think of volcanoes as being destructive things, they also act as giant sulphur shakers, putting this all-important element into the cycles of life. The essence of life is protein, and the proteins which we are made of contain tiny amounts of sulphur. Yes, even our hair is made of a protein called keratin. if it wasn't for the sulphur in my hair, it wouldn't curl or stand up right. In fact, it'd fall flat on my face.
Fantastico.
Bene, grazie.
Mille grazie. And mille grazie to sulfur too. Now, if you don't believe that there's sulfur in there, think when you singe your hair, that acrid smell, well, that is partly due to sulfur. And if it wasn't for the sulfur in the synovial membranes in my joints, I'd seize up. I wouldn't be able to talk with my hand. I wouldn't be able to be David Bellamy.
Rain is in the air. But of course, acid rain is as natural as the day is long, part of one of those great cycles which makes this living world go round. Naples, a city built at the foot of Vesuvius, one of the world's most famous sleeping volcanoes. The city is built on, in and around the remains of 40 other volcanoes, each one of which in the past blew their tops and collapsed to form calderas, great cauldrons within which we can still savour the elements of creation. I'm standing in the middle of a natural chemical laboratory, and at this point, not all that far below my feet, there's molten rock called magma. Now, if you can imagine actually rocks being in solution, that's exactly what's way down there, a solution of all the chemical elements that makes up not only this Earth, but the whole of the universe. Now, thanks to the giant fissure behind me, which must go way down, it's called the Bocco Grande, and some of those elements are coming up to the surface. Now, I suppose the best thing is to call it earth exhaust, the exhaust gases of volcanic activity, mixed up with lots and lots of water, steam. There's all mainly carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen. In fact, all the elements that you and I are made of. And that's just for starters. And all around me, other minerals are crystallising onto the rocks, including some rather rare and nasty ones like mercury and arsenic. Pretty, aren't they? But the predominant colour hereabouts is yellow, and that's due to elemental sulphur. And I tell you, when this lot last went up to form this giant caldera, it must have sprayed a vast area. High in the Alps, the trees are under great environmental stress. In fact, these are at the tree line, which means they can't live any higher. Looks idyllic, but today in these penthouse forests, all is not well. No, I'm not dying of high altitude sickness, but lying flat on my back doing the acid test of tree health. Just look up into the canopy. Acid